As you probably guessed, I'm an analyst. I'm based in London in the UK. I'm the chief analyst for the consumer and entertainment team at OVUM. So I have the privilege of working with a team of about 36 analysts. And we look at every aspect of the digital consumer and entertainment experience. So I think for those of you who maybe aren't particularly familiar with OVUM, we're a firm which focuses very much on the TMT sector, technology, media and telecoms. I think the thing our clients really look towards us for is market sizing and forecasting. So in my team we look at TV, we look at OTT video, we look at mobile video increasingly, a very interesting and important part of the mix. We also look at video games, social networking, advertising, all of the ways in which companies and service providers monetize their services and products. So I wanted to share with you today just some of the ways in which we think about how media and entertainment is evolving in Southeast Asia and Malaysia in particular. I thought I'd share with you some of the data which many of our clients in the region find interesting, and also to share with you a little bit of analysis we're doing around what we think are some of the more interesting developments in TV and video distribution in the region. So I was recently in Bangkok where I presented some similar slides. I've tried to sort of customize it a little bit for you guys. But I hope it gives you an idea of the way in which we think about these industries and how they're developing. So traditionally we work with pay TV service providers, we work with broadcasters both on the commercial and on the public service side. We're also very fortunate to work with most of the world's telcos and network operators. And we also work with a large number of technology vendors. So we try to have a very broad perspective of how these issues are developing. So I thought we'd kick off just having a think about, when we think about TV and video distribution, what are the major ways in which these businesses generate revenue? And so what we split out in this deck is predominantly revenues generated by advertising on TV, revenues generated by pay TV, both on the subscription and the VOD side. Very important and increasingly key part of the growth narrative going forward. The revenue generated by OTT subscriptions, and then OTT AVOD, ad-supported video on demand, the revenue generated by online video advertising. And finally, another interesting and growing sector, the revenue generated by mobile ad-supported video on demand. So when we think about these on a very broad basis, so I don't think it'd be a surprise to anyone in this room that on the traditional side of TV and video, when we think about TV advertising and pay TV subscriptions in particular, these are relatively mature markets, these are relatively mature segments. Across much of the world, and the ASEAN region is no exception, these segments are either in a very, very low growth mode. In some countries we see they're in sectoral decline. What growth there is in TV and video distribution currently is obviously very much focused on the digital side in both online and mobile predominantly. But when we think about the types of the companies which are benefiting from this growth, they obviously come from the very untraditional side of TV and video distribution. So this is a big problem for the traditional pay TV service providers and commercial broadcasters. The main growth stories in their industry tend to be dominated by other companies. So this is something which has been a big cause for concern for many of our clients. But of course, we also work with the digital platforms as well, and we can see. Good morning. We can see exactly how aggressive and how capable they are at dominating this market. Hey. Oh, okay. I'm not sure, because that one's okay. Is there some magic trick that I'm missing? Is that better? So then you see, so you get it bigger, but you also get my next slide as well. Is that better? I don't know if anyone knows. I beg your pardon? Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So anyway, if we have a look at some of the countries within the region, in general, looking at Southeast Asia on a regional basis is almost completely meaningless. Each of the individual countries within the region have their own internal dynamics and vary considerably from each other. I mean, we're seeing a similar pattern in terms of, okay, on the traditional side of the business, pay TV and TV advertising still constitute the lion's share of TV and video distribution by quite a long way. When we think about things like the contribution.
Okay, sorry, just continue.
When we think about, when we think about the. Okay, cool. Look, I think the things I'd point out within the region is, I mentioned that certainly on the traditional side, we're seeing a lot of pressure for pay TV. I mean, if we think about Singapore in particular, that's a country where pay TV is in sectoral decline. Very much sort of mirrors the pattern that we're seeing in the US market. This is very difficult for the two main pay TV providers in Singapore. Very small market, been shrinking for a few years now. We work with StarHub and Singtel. This is a very challenging situation for them. What we've also seen within Singapore, excellent broadband connectivity, the growth of OTT subscription business, significantly driven by Netflix in the nation state. I think within Vietnam and Thailand, we see a huge amount of fragmentation, too many pay TV service providers. Depending on the regulatory situation, we would expect to see some form of consolidation going forward. So, thinking about how we actually look at the Malaysian market, I've tried to split it out a little bit more for you. I mean, I think the things that we think about Malaysia, which are quite distinctive compared to many of the other countries we look at, I think the first thing is that the domination of Astro is to an extent unprecedented. I think all over the world. I can't think of another country where a single pay TV operator is so dominant. And when we look at some of the ways in which Astro has tried to pursue growth and has tried to defend its market position, there are some pretty cool things that they do. We think they're a relatively progressive organisation. We think they're hungry. They have a great stake in premium content distribution, particularly on the sporting side. They've attempted to get into the OTT market like many other pay TV providers have, and we also think they've made some interesting moves, particularly with the free satellite offering, which we think drove some interesting commercial results. But Astro, like many pay TV service providers, is suffering hard from competition from OTT players. I think in Malaysia we look at Netflix and iFlix as two of the key platforms, which basically will be dominating the market share for OTT subscription revenues. So the other growth narratives, when we think about OTT advertising and mobile OTT video advertising and mobile video advertising, once again, the growth metrics look great, but pretty much all of that benefit is accruing to a handful of non-traditional companies, predominantly YouTube and perhaps Facebook video and a handful of others. Again, benefiting the non-traditional sector as opposed to commercial broadcasters or pay TV service providers. One of the other ways in which we've recently started thinking about how the entertainment market is developing is, okay, so look, if we go back the slide, sorry, then okay, you can see these all when we do our figures like this, when we do a forecast like this, there's a tendency to think of each of these things in isolation, as if it's just its own little universe. But of course, there's a lot of interconnection, a lot of interdependencies. Of course, people who subscribe to pay TV will also watch a lot of ad-supported online video. These are not separate entities. And we think that on the supply side, service providers are starting to understand this, particularly broadcasters who are starting, we think now, to marry their TV strategies and their online video strategies more effectively than they ever have before. We can think about that a little bit more as we go forward. But when we really try to think about, so look, how are households and individuals, we think over the last few years there's been a very interesting tendency where maybe we go back 10 or 15 years, and most households would tend to take their viewing from maybe one or two sources. You have a free-to-air TV, you have free-to-air TV supplied maybe by the years or through a DTT box, or maybe you have a pay TV subscription. Maybe you have a DVD player. The world was much, much simpler when I started being an analyst. Nowadays, of course, we see individuals and households, and they're collating TV and video sources from multiple different providers and multiple different business models, in a relatively fragmented and complex way. So what we started doing is, we started thinking to ourselves, so what are the major ways in which households in a particular country or region, how do they put together these different sources of TV and video entertainment? So this is a relatively new type of analysis. We call it multi-subscription forecasting. And I mean, it's not multi-subscription, it's multiple TV and video sources. But look, I just thought I'd share with you. So look, this is how we see Southeast Asia, Oceania, and Eastern Asia in 2019 compared to 2023. And what we're currently trying to do is, in each region and an increasing number of countries, I think we're up to about 25 countries currently, but we'd like to get to about 70 by the end of the year. And certainly Malaysia will be one of those coming in the second wave. But we're very keen to isolate the major archetypes, the major ways in which people are putting together these different types of TV and video. So, I mean, of course, there's standalone free TV. You can see pretty obviously was a relatively significant segment, but we'd expect it to be shrinking significantly over the next 4 years. And where we're seeing some of the biggest amounts of growth, OTT video and pay TV, OTT video and free TV. So a lot of the companies that we work with use this type of analysis to determine how they're going to compete in the country. If you're an OTT service, how does your OTT video platform coexist with either the major free TV or pay TV propositions within that country? So over the last couple of years, we've also seen a big trend of pay TV service providers to work increasingly with OTT video platforms, quite often positioning the OTT video service directly on the set-top box as another type of content provider. It used to be very primitive. Maybe they just stick Netflix in the application layer of the set-top box, and then you click the Netflix icon. Netflix logo appears on the screen, Netflix user interface. Netflix doesn't share any data with the pay TV service provider. Very, very bad position to put yourself in. Because we say it's your customer. You must retain visibility. We can have another discussion about the importance of audience data and how that's becoming more fundamental to driving television operations. But anyway, over the last few years, we think pay TV service providers have become more enlightened about the ways. Pay TV service providers have become more enlightened about the ways in which they're working with OTT video. One other thing I'd point out is, for a number of years, the narrative was that pay TV is going to die and that OTT video will take over. We never believed that that was the case. From the early days of growth of the major OTT subscription platforms, we saw a huge level of overlap between people who subscribe to pay TV and people who subscribe to OTT video platforms. I think, we did some pretty deep analysis on some of the pay TV customer bases in UK and the USA. And we think some of the work we did around Sky UK subscribers, I think nearly 80% of Sky subscribers also subscribe to Netflix. So when Sky and Netflix started working together earlier this year, this is a very customer-friendly way to behave. But when we think about the integration between Sky and Netflix, it's a little bit different to the earlier ones. They don't just stick the Netflix application on the set-top box, but the Netflix content is directly positioned within Sky's VOD library. So you can see it's just a little Netflix logo on the corner of the program icon. But it's a much more customer-friendly way, we think, to give people access to this content. And the integration doesn't just extend to the user interface, but also Netflix is being, the Netflix subscription is being offered alongside the Sky subscription. There's a little bit of soft/hard bundling there, depending on how you categorize it. But standalone OTT video is a very, very small segment of the household composition of most of these markets, and it's not one we expect to grow dramatically. Essentially, traditional TV in whatever shape you wish to call it, we think is going to persist. Will persist for a good number of years yet. So, I mentioned that in the main growth stories in TV and video distribution, OTT subscriptions and OTT video advertising revenue, it's very, very difficult for traditional players to compete. So, the main ways in which they are trying to compete for this revenue growth is obviously, we see broadcasters launching online video platforms, catch-up services of some description, and we see pay TV service providers launching OTT pay TV, what looks like a pay TV service, a linear channel proposition, but offered over the public internet rather than over a satellite, cable, or IPTV connection. So in the US, they call this the skinny bundle strategy. We started working out, the market share of broadcaster online video advertising platforms as a proportion of the entire market, and pay TV service provider skinny bundle market share of all OTT video subscriptions. And I hope you can see that the efforts on both types of traditional player haven't been particularly successful at all. I think they found it incredibly challenging to take market share, essentially from the native digital platforms. This is a big concern going forward. We know that commercial broadcast is stagnant, is a very, very low, it might be a relatively large market, but it's relatively stable, a low growth opportunity in most markets. Broadcasters' efforts to try to take more market share in online video advertising have been spectacularly unsuccessful up till now. There's a huge number of problems that have in this particular market. Obviously, the competition is very, very intense. Broadcasters' OTT video platforms, their catch-up services, the premium propositions that they've launched in some markets have not gained much traction at all. They're facing a number of challenges. So when we speak to broadcasters are very frustrated. They say, look, we're trying to compete with YouTube, we're trying to compete with social video platforms, we're trying to compete with messaging platforms which may have some kind of user-generated video strategy, and we cannot get the scale of audience that gets advertisers interested. when we go to advertisers and we say, you should pay us a higher price for advertising against our shows, because these are long shows, we spend a lot of money, they're 30 minutes, these are not 2.5-minute dog on a skateboard video. We think we're better than that, you know what I mean? But, such is the market power of the digital platforms. We believe they drag the price of the advertising down, and this is a very, very difficult gravitational force to try to escape. In terms of how we see OTT, pay TV developing in a lot of countries, again, so look, the US is probably where we've seen these services launch in the greatest volume, where we have the longest operating history, and the growth has been relatively disappointing. OTT pay TV, we don't see it as replacing traditional pay TV currently. It seems to be a supplement to that particular market, and it's certainly not been successful in enabling them to either slow the growth of the likes of iFlix or Netflix. Again, very, very challenging. Market share extremely low. So, I mentioned that trying to compete with the native digital platforms is probably one of the toughest things you can do. Well, I mean, we're fortunate enough to work with all of them except for Amazon. And these are incredibly capable organizations. They're more driven by data-oriented decision-making than I've ever seen. There's no emotion in anything they do. But, we feel the embrace of the platforms, not just across the entertainment business models, but also within the device landscape is now becoming comprehensive. And if you want to reach your customer digitally, it's very, very difficult to do without having some scale of involvement with the shorthand term of FANGs. I don't know if you guys use that. But okay, so when we're looking at these, then we just see the embrace across all of these particular business models. And when we think, okay, so if we take someone like, if we take Netflix, if we think about Netflix's global rollout over the last couple of years, they can behave in ways that traditional players don't. Netflix, when it enters a country, it front loads a huge level of the investment in promotional and launch marketing, and is effective and is quite happy to run individual country operations at a significant loss while it builds a customer base. Amazon has become an increasingly important player in OTT video as well. Basically, if Amazon launches an e-commerce platform in your country, that's when they're getting very, very serious about the market. But I'm sure that many of you have been following recent developments in content production and investment in particular. And with Apple, Amazon, and Netflix, they're now bringing a level of spending to the market which is completely beyond the reach of nationally bound traditional players. They simply have much larger audiences against which to monetize their investments. And frankly, they're also prepared to run their video operations at a loss because it supports so many other parts of their business. It's not the main event for them, and they have the scale to be able to sustain that type of business model. It's totally unrealistic to expect a traditional player to compete with that. One development which we're currently very, very interested in, which we notice kind of emerging in a lot of evolving markets outside of Western Europe, North America, where a lot of these things quite often start. But we noticed the emergence about 18 months to 2 years ago. We think the sort of leading platforms started scaling. But we call them hybrid OTT video platforms, but essentially it's a video platform which combines a free ad-supported video layer and a subscription layer. So obviously the company which uses that model, which is closest to Southeast Asia, would be iFlix, which started as a subscription service. but when subscription growth did not meet their expectations, they launched the ad-supported layer to try to extend their reach to more people, to drive more brand recognition, and to effectively give themselves another pillar of revenue generation outside of the subscription side. Building a subscription-based video business in many parts of the world, Southeast Asia, Latin America, is really is quite difficult. You know, there are a number of challenges, particularly around payment processing and pricing in many cases as well. You know, Netflix is traditionally around $10 a month, which, you know, in the US is around 1/10 of what people spend on pay TV on average. But $10 a month in a country like Indonesia is obviously a completely different proposition. So we noticed the emergence of the hybrid OTT video platform, where you do have a free layer of access, which enables anyone to watch the platform and enables a sort of low level of monetization through the advertising. It's not particularly huge, apart from except for iQIYI and Hotstar in China and India, respectively. That's such as the size of the audience. We'll think about them in a little bit. But yeah, the main ways of monetizing through the hybrid OTT video platforms, obviously straight up AVOD, SVOD, for the small proportion of customers you can graduate to a subscription layer. And there is also, in some of these models, the ability to offer microtransactions, either to try to drive sort of super fan engagement for particular shows or individuals. So we call it the velvet rope model. You know, sometimes outside of a nightclub you have a velvet rope, and it's to try to convince people to go past the velvet rope and pay up to come in. So, thinking about the OTT videos, the hybrid platforms that we're looking at, currently we split out Hotstar, IV, IV's Russian. iQIYI in China is an absolute juggernaut and is responsible for most of these huge numbers you see. And also, you know, you could classify YouTube TV, which is essentially YouTube's OTT pay TV proposition, only available in a very small number of countries. But you know, we can also classify that as a hybrid video platform strategy. I mentioned we're looking at iFlix pretty closely. If you're really interested in iFlix, we do split out the subscription numbers for individual OTT services across about 70 countries. So we do have a standalone forecast for iFlix. But I thought it'd be interesting just to think a little bit about what iFlix's strategy and what they've been up to recently. I mean, we mentioned you know, they obviously extended their embrace with the free layer. We also thought they did some interesting. They've done some interesting deals with some channels to have a linear streaming proposition. We're very interested. We don't quite know yet, but we're very interested in how the advertising revenues are split between some of these channels and iFlix itself in this particular business model. We also noticed that they're getting more active in sports rights acquisitions, working with a company called Z Sports in particular to try to expand that portfolio. And iFlix is also incredibly aggressive about working with operators and telcos. And we believe, we don't know, but we've got a pretty strong suspicion that a lot of iFlix's subscriptions are delivered through telco and operator bundles rather than standalone, which is a very effective strategy. But the thing is, and we know this from a lot of other operators who have tried to do a similar thing, you know, if you do give someone a free video or music subscription with your mobile subscription, then you know, so this is that's one thing. But actually getting the customer to use it is a separate challenge altogether. So we have a strong suspicion that many of these bundled subscriptions delivered don't actually get used. So iFlix's numbers in particular are very difficult to get a fix on. But we think we have a reasonable idea. I think more recently we were very interested in the deal that they did with Media Prima. I think we've chatted with Media Prima a reasonable amount over the last few years, and we think that they have the dilemma that many other traditional commercial broadcasters have been going through. How do I monetize my content most effective digitally? And obviously they've been trying to do it on a first party or proprietary basis for a number of years. And so, we were quite interested to see that they're prepared to throw in, one of their most recognizable digital brands onto the iFlix platform. And so, so we're wondering, we don't know, but we have the suspicion that when they were trying to do it themselves, perhaps it didn't work out so well, and that they believe that they can get a better commercial result by asking iFlix to do it on their behalf, which is quite a big development in my eyes.
I'm talking about content, original content development.
The TomTom VOD catalog, I believe, is distributed through iFlix. Okay. In terms of original content development, I believe that iFlix is getting more enthusiastic about. Obviously, it's making a lot more of its own shows, we believe, and is also getting more enthusiastic about co-production deals with local broadcasters as well.
Budgets are very limited.
Yeah. I would definitely agree with that. Absolutely. So we mentioned that the big trick for all of these hybrid platforms is graduating a proportion of your free audience and convincing them to subscribe. Very, very, very challenging exercise. And so we've tried to calculate for each of these platforms, what percentage of their audiences they manage to put their hand in their wallet and become a subscriber. To be fair, iFlix, we think, has actually been performing reasonably well compared to the other platforms. I think the two very interesting case studies would be Ivy in Russia and iQIYI in China, which has driven spectacular subscription growth with an incredibly large audience. iQIYI has been very aggressive on rights acquisitions, including some new release Hollywood content, new US dramas. One of the only places in China that you can watch many of these shows. So one other area which I just wanted to touch on is some of the developments in mobile networking and essentially the introduction of 5G networks. You might notice these are the 12 leading countries in terms of adoption for 5G, and we expect Indonesia and Thailand to be amongst them. There are a number of ways in which we evaluate countries for readiness for adopting 5G. Predominantly the level of penetration of 4G connections and the enthusiasm, the readiness of government and regulators to promote the 5G networks. Currently, we believe that Malaysia will launch 5G networks in 2021, and we think you're going to get to about 1 million subscribers in 2022. Over the last 18 months, we've been working pretty extensively around the opportunities that 5G may offer the TV and video industries. This is only going to be a little segue in this presentation, but just to give you a little bit of context around how we think about this. We believe that the generational leap in terms of the new types of networking capability that 5G will offer, it means that it will be 3G to 4G was this bigger difference between mobile networking generations. 4G to 5G is going to be much more dramatic. So actually, some of the most interesting aspects of the 5G story is probably around government, enterprise, automotive. So people are like, where's the consumer and entertainment angle in all of this? Well, I think the things that we think will change initially is that, okay, of course, the performance, the capacity and speed of 5G networks is going to be dramatically improved on 4G. So the quality of the video experience is going to be better. Currently, mobile video distribution, things like the resolution, the audio stream in particular, tend to get absolutely smashed to save bandwidth. What we also see with 4G networks currently is when a large number of people want to watch the same live stream at the same time, this can pose significant challenges for networks. So the linear or the live TV streaming experience on a cellular network has certainly been somewhat lacking. With 5G, we certainly expect the networks will have the capacity to address a much, much larger audience and offer them a much higher quality experience. We believe that this will empower network operators to perhaps involve themselves in TV and video more directly and more successfully than they have previously. I've tried to just list on here, I'm not going to go through them all in torturous detail, but on a broad timeline from left to right, 2020 going to 2030, we're thinking a very long way ahead. I know we only usually go 5 years, but we think that this is a pretty big and important development. In terms of what 5G will enable us to do, which we can't currently do, I think the things I'd highlight would be a vastly improved cloud gaming experience. Microsoft and Google have recently launched relatively significant cloud gaming platform investments. We also believe that the augmented reality, the virtual reality experience will be enabled by 5G and will be two types of consumer experience which we think will scale significantly. Another area in which we've seen a lot of experimentation from pay TV service providers in particular is using the handset as a substitute for the set-top box. The handset can effectively fulfill the functionality of a set-top box already. The handset married with some kind of native cloud platform means that instead of having a set-top box underneath your TV with a hard disk drive where you record your shows in the cloud on a network DVR. And the other piece of functionality that this potential innovation relies on is, some of you might be familiar with the current capability that if you're watching a show on your mobile, then some types of platform allow you to cast it or share it with a much bigger screen. And so what we're seeing some pay TV service providers looking at is, instead of sending you a pay TV service, installing a set-top box in your house, which is complicated and expensive, they simply do it all through your handset. Obviously, you can use your handset as a mobile viewing device during the day. Then you come home and just leave your handset near the TV and acts as a set-top box, and you have a fully featured pay television service, but delivered through a 5G cellular network. This is something which is potentially quite interesting. So the other thing that I'll say about 5G when we look at it is, we don't believe that we're going to get to like late 2019 or 2020 and that network operators around the world will start flicking a switch and you will get 5G networks appearing with all of these advanced capabilities which will enable some of these really wild sci-fi ideas that we see in the press. A lot of the 5G coverage at the moment talks about things like you'll be able to control your vehicle remotely. We're going to have autonomous drone networks powered by 5G. We'll be able to have surgeons doing remote surgery from hundreds of miles away. These things are all fantastic, and I sincerely hope they happen. But if they do, it's not going to be till the late 2020s. The networking capabilities of 5G, which will differentiate it from 4G, is obviously much, much faster data speed, much greater capacity in the network. But the really interesting ones, lowering the latency around the network, ultra low latency, which is what will enable things like cloud gaming and the AR, VR and mixed reality possibilities as well. The other two interesting aspects of 5G networking technology will be edge computing So you'll have processing capability in the network itself. A lot of enterprises and businesses have digital platforms of some description which rely on cloud processing, which is provided by Microsoft or Google or Amazon currently. Mobile operators will be able to compete in that particular area once edge processing is introduced. And network slicing would be the last one, where you can effectively take a slice of your network and say to a company or a service provider, this bit of the network is yours and yours alone. You're the only one using it, and you can get certain types of guarantee for performance, etc., etc. So network slicing is already being used for emergency services communications. But when we think about network slicing, ultra-low latency, and edge processing, and the innovations that they will enable as we go through the 2020s, we don't know what the problem will be yet. But we certainly think that this will be this is the major growth narrative of the 2020s for pretty much all types of company. If 5G isn't going to do it, then we don't see what else will. So I thought we'd round off just by thinking about some of the big challenges that a lot of my clients are currently really worried about and asking for help, for insight, for data on. And I think I've touched on a few of these as we've gone through the presentation. It is, for a number of years, pay TV service providers, commercial broadcasters, have been feeling the pain. They know that they've been feeling the competition. They've been seeing the numbers. We've been telling them for years, this is what's going to happen to your market share in digital unless you do something dramatic. And the fact is that largely everything they've tried up till now hasn't really worked. I think last year we saw a huge wave of mergers and acquisitions activity in the US market in particular, when we saw AT&T and Time Warner coming together, when we see Disney and 21st Century Fox coming together. I think we could also extend that out to Comcast buying the Sky Group in the UK, and perhaps some other smaller M&A activity. This M&A activity was predominantly driven by an existential fear of what the digital platforms are doing to their businesses, which are largely based on things like pay TV, on the pay TV ecosystem, on the commercial broadcast ecosystem. I keep coming back to the point. What growth there is in TV and video distribution is accruing to very untraditional players. The traditional players are desperate to try to get a piece of this action. They've known that they had to do this for a number of years, and they've not succeeded in doing it yet. So what is left? So one way, and this is, I think we're getting close to the last chance saloon here. One way is, okay, let's come together. Let's get much bigger. This will do a number of things. First of all, for commercial broadcast, it will give us access to a much larger scale audience. For when they're thinking about how they're going to compete with the likes of Netflix, with the likes of Amazon, for OTT subscription market share, being larger enables them to spend more on content. Hopefully bring them closer to the levels of Netflix and Amazon, but we've done some other analysis on content spending, if we take out what they spend on sports rights, they still can't get close to Netflix and Amazon in terms of what they spend on scripted content. But it will get them closer. So this year, we'll see the launch of streaming platforms from Disney and Warner Brothers, which will bring them, which they hope will enable them to compete more effectively. But this is an unproven hypothesis, and it's going to be many years for these platforms to start scaling up to the to 10, 20, 30 million subscribers, which is where they need to be. A very, very difficult problem to solve. So if we think about stagnating or contrasting or contracting subscriptions on the pay TV side. But when we work with pay TV operators at the moment, you know, we already talked to them about segmenting their customer base more effectively than they have historically. Pay TV service providers have traditionally tended to offer, you know, just a relatively expensive product for their marketplaces. You know, we've long been saying to them, you have to get slightly smarter about addressing more value-conscious customers who may not want to make such a long commitment. The OTT pay TV launches, or the skinny bundle strategy, was meant to be a part of that, but for a number of reasons, it hasn't had the results that they hoped for. Currently, what we're seeing with many pay TV service providers is that they're looking at their cost base very, very carefully, and actually they're trying to address the problem in another way. Let's improve our margins by essentially reducing our ongoing OPEX, because although subscription growth has largely disappeared from the market for many of these service providers, you know, we still have to remember that these are significant and large businesses, and that one thing we can say the pay TV service providers have been very effective at is they've been very, very good at maintaining the amount of money each subscriber pays. They've been very good at maintaining ARPU levels, average revenue per user, and effectively getting more money out of slowly shrinking subscriber bases. When we think about what's going on with commercial broadcasters, you know, I mentioned the phrase "last chance saloon" previously when it comes to competing for online video advertising market share. We know that what broadcasters have done up till now in the online space, launching platforms on launching their own platforms and trying to compete on a standalone basis, has not worked. It just definitely hasn't worked. I can hardly think of a case study in the world where we've seen them take effective market share from the likes of YouTube, from the likes of Facebook video, the absolute juggernauts of online video advertising. Over the last, I think in about Q3 last year, we started hearing about a number of initiatives from broadcasters in Europe predominantly, but also in a couple of other pockets in the US and a couple of countries in Latin America, where groups of broadcasters were coming together and saying, okay, it's not worked on our own. However, if we set aside our differences and we cooperate and we build an aggregated platform, a platform which we share, which relies on content from 2, 3, 4 broadcasters and their respective ad sales operations, obviously, perhaps we can make a better go of this. So we're certainly seeing this in the UK, Netherlands, Spain, off the top of my head, have some very, very interesting broadcaster cooperation initiatives going on to form cooperative aggregated platforms. Again, the idea being we come together, we can throw more content at the problem, and we should be able to attract a larger scale audience. And you know, let's see if we can compete more effectively, generate more market share. Some of them in Australia and the UK, the broadcasters have started using the term BVOD rather than AVOD to try to distinguish themselves from YouTube, broadcaster video on demand, as opposed to ad-supported video on demand. And again, this is all part of them trying to communicate to the marketplace. We are different from native digital platforms. Our shows are longer. They were only shown on TV for the first time maybe 1-2 days ago. You know, this is very this is content the audience is very excited about and interested in, and frankly, it deserves a higher price of advertising than then brands can pay to advertise against, say, short form or user-generated content. One other initiative which we're seeing both on the broadcaster side and on the pay TV side, for pay TV service providers who are involved in commercial broadcast, perhaps they own a few channels and have media sales operations as a result, is we are starting to see the emergence of cross-platform advertising campaigns in the marketplace, where for a single campaign buy, a brand advertiser can have campaigns running on traditional TV, linear TV, and on OTT, and increasingly on mobile as well. So a lot of companies are trying to build the infrastructure which basically enables them to track viewers as they move from TV to an online platform to a mobile platform. So what this means is, if you know that someone has seen your ad on traditional TV the night before and they start watching a tablet or a mobile phone the next day, then perhaps you'll show them a different advert from the same brand, this is the carousel effect. And perhaps if a viewer sees a brand's advert 3, 4, 5 times, then you show a different type of advert with perhaps some kind of call to action or commercial opportunity. The cross-platform ad campaign, appears to be again. This is something which broadcasters, they talk a very good game, but we've yet to really see its impact in the marketplace. But there's certainly a lot of very interesting activities to try to build this type of business. We're also seeing amongst a handful of the more advanced pay TV service providers launching what they call addressable advertising capabilities on their platforms. This essentially allows you to target advertising at particular households. So in a traditional model, if we're all watching TV and we're all watching the same channel at the same time, the ad break comes on, we all see the same advert in the traditional model. With addressable advertising, we're all watching the same channel at the same time. When the ad break comes on, we all see different adverts depending on what the pay TV service provider knows about our household, our demographics, our consumer habits, whatever you might think. So addressable advertising is a strategy which is largely only open to pay TV service providers because it's only them that own enough of the broadcast technology infrastructure to actually enable them to offer this type of capability in the first place. But it's something which we've done a case study on, I think, Sky in the UK, which has been very, very effective at launching this business and enabling advertisers to say, so I think one of the big things that advertisers have always complained about with TV advertising is that a lot of their spending, they believe, is wasted. What is the point of showing a dog food advert to a household which doesn't own any pets whatsoever? So with addressable advertising, they believe that it's much more efficient because the ads are targeted. So if a pet food manufacturer purchases an addressable advertising campaign, and obviously one of the things they can say is only show my advert to households which have pets. And the types of targeting that are currently being offered by some of the leading providers are getting pretty incredible. I mean, again, we don't want to segue into, but it's absolutely fascinating what you can tell about a household from the activity on the set-top box, and that's essentially what they're using to target these advertising campaigns. I think Sky offers, somewhere around over 100 types of targeting vector. Everything from basic demographics to only show my advert in this particular geographical location, to many, many other things like pet owners, college-age kids, likely to buy a car in the next 6 months, likely to book a holiday in the next 6 months, etc., etc., etc. Again, requires significant investment. I mean, Sky did this a few years ago. It cost them 100 million quid in 3 years of work with Cisco to put this in. But it's now the technology is becoming cheaper, and it's at least one type of business innovation which has a solid operating history, is appreciated by brands, and has been proven to make money.
So it's been proven to make money for Sky?
Huh?
It's been proven to make money for Sky?
Yeah, definitely. So,
this is the holy grail that we talked about 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's only now available.
Yeah. So, no, look, it's a very interesting the way they do it. So on the set-top box, I mean, this is Sky.
Yeah.
On the set-top box, sometime in the middle of the night, what they do is they download relevant ads to your household, to a portion of the hard disk drive which they reserve. And then when you're watching live TV the next day, then instead of the advert coming from the satellite dish, then it plays from the set-top box. But you have to the actual there's
a gap.
No, there isn't. So it's frame perfect, and the volumes are perfect. The volume levels are perfect as well, because if people know that they're being targeted, they start getting creeped out. Yeah. So I mean, I'm not sure if this is. So look, I mean, this is one. So as you might imagine, I have quite a few TV services in my house, and Sky is one of them. And when they started doing this, I was like, so I did you had to do an opt-in on the Sky thing because they use your data and all this sort of thing. So obviously I opted in. I'm a sports fan here. I watch a lot of sport. So and I'd be watching TV and I'd be trying to spot the ads which were targeting me. Thinking, what does Sky think I'm like? And initially the only way I could tell was there were adverts for businesses which were only operational in my region. So geographically limited adverts. So things like garden centres, car dealerships, but only regionally based within my region. So this is one of the other key things about addressable advertising, because you can say only show ads within this region, or you can say only show my ad this many times. It enables much smaller campaign buys than just a huge nationwide ad campaign. So I think Sky was saying that I think 65% of the advertisers using their addressable advertising technology had never advertised on TV before. These were car dealerships.
Used to be what Facebook was saying.
Yeah.
Now, broadcaster can say that too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Facebook says that.
Yeah, I know. Look, you're completely right on that. Targeting ads has been like trivial for digital, online, and mobile, like since the beginning. You know what I mean? This is absolutely like Google, Facebook's like core skill set. And it's taken TV, this long to catch up. But as TV and video distribution, increasingly goes online, then the traditional TV companies, they need this targeting capability, and they need to take it, online to be able to compete. Because if they don't do it themselves, then they have to rely on the targeting offered by the digital platforms, which is a very frightening place to be.
Is this making inroads in Asia Pacific?
I would have to no.
Indonesia next year.
No. Okay, I do know that, as you might imagine, we speak to Astro quite a lot. I know that they were very, very interested in it, because they're very interested in a lot of the stuff Sky does. I can't recall if they've implemented it.
They're not in a financial position to do so.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah.
But we can.
Yeah.
On DTT.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what I've been personally thinking about.
Yeah.
I'll share shortly.
No, it's. I mean, it's. So it is also. It will also underpin. One of the main ways in which the traditional TV industry could fight back, because, of course, the one place where the digital platforms can't currently compete is on traditional linear TV. And I know everyone is linear TV is one of the least trendy things nowadays. Like, kids don't watch TV, etc., etc., etc. But still, viewing levels, hours per day spent watching something, linear TV still performs incredibly well across all age groups. From what we see in younger demographics, it is on the decline relative to previous generations, but it is still significant. And traditional linear TV is the one place where currently, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and Netflix aren't directly there. I mean, they're on the big screen, but they're not in the traditional TV ecosystem in the same way. Google has launched the Android OS with the set-top box, slightly different. But they have to take this targeting capability, and they have to take that targeting capability across TV, online, and mobile, and use it to fight back, because it's pretty much one of the only things they've got left. Look, content. We sort of mentioned a little bit about how much of the M&A was driven by the desire to come together, to become bigger, and to be able to spend more on content. I mean, it's not just the total amount you spend on content, but it's focusing that content spending on a single platform. When everyone says Netflix is spending $8 to $10 billion this year on new content, it's all on Netflix's platform. When Time Warner or when Disney or Fox spend X billion per year, it's not on a single platform. It's across dozens and dozens of TV channels, across quite a few disparate OTT channels. It's a bit of a mess. So what we're seeing with the launch of Disney Plus, with Time Warner, there will be a one streaming platform, but I think they're putting most of their big bets in the HBO Now platform. But you've got to concentrate more spending onto less platforms, essentially. This will have a number of impacts. Certainly, we expect there to be less TV channels over the next few years, particularly the smaller channels, perhaps down the darker end of the EPG. Currently, the big channel broadcasters have multiple channel brands: Discovery this, Discovery that, Discovery this, Discovery that. BBC, CBBS, BBC maybe not such a good example because they're in a reasonable position. But we expect there to be less channel brands as distribution goes increasingly online, because the market simply won't sustain it. We've talked a lot about competing with OTT, and we'll be talking about that for some time to come. What we have started talking about with a lot of the companies that we work with is that, look, if you're the market leader, perhaps the number 2 in a big market, then there's probably a large enough and sustainable enough business to defend, to maintain. But some tier 3, some tier 4 operators who are much smaller, it's very difficult to see how they're going to remain commercially viable for the longer term. So again, we'd expect over the next few years for there to be less pay TV service providers as well, certainly in a traditional sense. And when we're thinking about some of the growth opportunities, I think currently we've talked about OTT, AVOD. That will continue to grow. It's still only a proportion of the spending on TV advertising in many countries. So there's still a long growth trajectory to come as spending. Another debate we can have, but as spending shifts, generally speaking, from traditional TV to digital. But again, we have to remember that this is starting from a base where traditional TV tends to be a very, very large and significant business in most countries, and digital only being a proportion of that. Where we are seeing pretty dramatic growth metrics in a number of countries, actually all the way across Southeast Asia. We did a big project last year for a major pay TV operator in the region, where we looked very, very closely at mobile video advertising growth. And look, in some markets, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, currently at very, very low levels, but growing like crazy. And again, this is a business segment that we believe will be significantly accelerated with the introduction of not just 5G cellular networks, but actually increasing the penetration of 4G subscriptions in many countries, which is still largely reliant on 3G. And so that was the bulk of my presentation. I've overrun a little bit. I'm just looking at my clock, but I'll be delighted to answer any questions you have. You know where we are, and we're always happy to continue the discussion with you. But thank you very much for your patience.
I've got a bunch of stuff, gazillion questions.
Yeah.
But I got to run, so let me start and then I got to run. Who's can? Then we'll Now, this is a very personal topic of interest to me. 4 or 5 years ago, I cut the cord. I run the US IP in my router. I've got DirecTV now,
Yeah.
Hulu, and
Yeah.
Netflix
Yeah.
at home for the last 4 or 5 years.
Wow.
One in Malaysia, perhaps. You don't
Yeah.
know that, right? So it's a totally different world.
Yeah.
And I pay about 2/3 of what I used to pay Astro.
Wow.
With triple the content.
Yeah,
5 years
yeah,
ago. 5
yeah,
years ago.
yeah.
Because it's possible, right?
Yeah.
Technology allows that.
Yeah.
And now here is
Actually,
actually,
it's not expensive.
yeah, I mean, if you take all of Astro's channels, it's
Right.
almost 300 ringgit.
Yeah.
I'm paying 250
Okay.
for all three.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? DirecTV Now, which is AT&T.
yeah.
That's $35 US.
Yeah.
Hulu ad free $11.99 US.
Yeah.
And Netflix UHD
Yeah.
all channels is what $11.
Sure.
Anyway, that's not the point. The point is our challenge now is DTT.
Yeah.
So addressable advertising is very interesting.
Yeah.
But so first statement is, and this is a debate.
Yeah.
It's the box. If
Yeah.
you put a dumb box,
Yeah.
which is what we have now,
Yeah.
then the industry will not grow
Yeah.
because everyone is dependent on box.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Power of the box, the ability to target.
Yeah.
So we as regulators, if we want to develop this sector, we need to think.
It's so interesting you said that about
Oh,
DTT.
yeah.
We've been we're speaking to another government agency in another country in Southeast Asia where they've come to us with, well, they basically said to us, look, we are very concerned about how effectively we're monetizing the DTT ecosystem. Can we?
Actually, it's zero.
Yeah.
We're just transferring analog to digital.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
won't value that.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And that's why the industry is not growing. It's huge. right?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
this
Yeah.
is a set of box.
Yeah.
So everybody has this.
Yeah.
We're casting out.
Yeah.
So the free-to-air guys
Yeah.
with a superior app
Yeah.
can then do the cross-platform advertising,
Yeah.
which will grow the whole sector.
That would
And
be.
you stop whining.
Yeah. Stop whining. Yeah.
Because Media Prima is 500 million ringgit.
Yeah.
Advertising is pathetic.
Yeah.
Right? RTM is 50 million ringgit advertising. They are not even paying the salaries
Yeah.
cost per year. So we as a regulator industry developer
Yeah.
have to be 10 steps ahead of these guys.
I know.
Because
Yeah.
they're stuck. They're stuck in a rut where they just cannot remodel the business.
It's
They
very
don't have
difficult. I mean, look, so the addressable advertising initiatives that I'm aware of, like, did take significant
money. So
investment.
we'll probably engage you guys a bit more
Yeah.
on this broader model and how to,
Yeah. I mean, look, the other thing when we're thinking about, the role of mobile is, we don't exactly know how the mobile viewing ecosystem will develop as we go forward. Currently, it's very app-based, it's very fragmented, and I think if we're going to have an effective strategy like you're talking about, then it will almost certainly have to be delivered through an aggregator of some kind. So this is why pay TV service providers have been so effective at it, because they own enough of the broadcast technology infrastructure to be able to do the targeting across all three of the platforms. They also have the relationship with the subscriber, with the household, which is where they get most of the data, the targeting information, to actually be able to do the basic targeting in the first place. So, without a single powerful entity which kind of has both the technology and the commercial reach across all three of them, and the relationship with the household, I think it could be quite difficult. There is a DTT initiative in addressable advertising, which I can't remember. There's also Germany is doing something similar, but not over DTT, another technology whose name I also can't remember off the top of my head. But there's a couple of things I can follow up with.
Yeah, I'll send you an email.
Yeah. That'd be great. Yeah.
Now, when you look at iFlix,
Yeah.
so when they started, the world to them was very basic.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a distribution channel. But it's wrong, because all this OTT, DTT is not just distribution. You have to have the ability to build content.
Yeah.
iFlix doesn't have the funding to build content.
Yeah.
It's 6 or 10 million ringgit a year.
Yeah.
Netflix is 16 billion US a year.
Yeah. But
16 billion US a year.
so I think
How do you compete?
well, I think the thing that we would think about in that context is, look, I think iFlix and Netflix can coexist.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? There's not a huge amount of overlap. iFlix is much more regionally focused. Netflix obviously much more US focused. So,
But iFlix needs to evolve.
Yes.
on its own,
Yeah.
does not have the financial might to have a content library.
That's true, but it did attract an investment. It has got some investments. Maybe there's another fundraising to come. I mean, look, iFlix's strength, I think, is it does have relatively broad geographic coverage, and it's also been getting involved in North Africa as well. And it's in on the ground floor in some markets which we would expect to develop relatively rapidly over the next few years. And I'm thinking particularly about Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam, where we do see significant greenfield growth opportunities. And and iFlix is in there. It does have staff in these countries, and it does have an understanding of local audiences, which Netflix simply doesn't. But okay. So the other thing that we kind of think is that there's room probably for no more than 6 truly global video platforms, of which Netflix will be one, Amazon another, Facebook Video might be another, maybe Disney Plus will squeak in there. And so that's so at least 4 to 6 global video platforms. This is what most households around the world will eventually subscribe to, Netflix or Amazon. And then on top of that, maybe people will subscribe to a more regionally or nationally focused video platform. That could be a pay TV provider. That might be something like an iFlix in Southeast Asia. It might be something like a Hotstar in India. And then outside, and that will be the majority of your viewing time.
And then the interesting experiment that UK is doing, which is BritBox.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was referring to, the broadcaster collaboration.
So that's another experimentation with intention.
Yeah.
I think we'll see in the next couple of years. It's free to air in a box.
Yeah,
So
the problem with all of these broadcaster initiatives is
still within the same
the
company.
broadcasters hate each other. They can't stand how they're going to work together now. They've been at war for years.
So this is where
This is
our
not
role
realistic.
becomes important.
Yeah.
We're such a tiny country.
Yeah,
2 free to air.
yeah,
9 channels, 10
Yeah,
channels free
yeah,
to air.
yeah,
180 whatever paid TV subscription, Astro, etc.
yeah.
So as a regulator, we really need to think about the longevity and sustainability of this industry. Because ultimately, it is a communication channel to the consumer, for the government, for education, etc.
I mean,
beyond our business as usual.
I would look
We have to step outside the box.
with a small market. I think the key thing is trying to sustain a healthy commercial broadcast ecosystem, because that is, with a small audience, that can get crushed very, very quickly.
Today we are very hands off.
Yeah.
We will be hands on going forward.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
If the industry dies,
Yeah.
it is a whole veneer of
Yeah.
society
Yeah.
that goes with it.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. And it's less choice for the audience. On the content creation or the production side, there'll be less diversity, less variety, and most of it will come from the west coast of the US. So I don't think this works for a lot of countries. Yeah, no, it's
I can go.
It's
You
a
guys,
big one.
enjoy.
No, thank you so much for your time.
Cheers.
Yeah, take care.
I'll send you
nice to
Cheers.
you.
Yeah, thank you so
The country, in terms of regulatory approaches, apart from what the chairman said, what are the things that come to mind?
That's a difficult question. So look, we have a dedicated team of analysts who cover regulation. If you could drop me an email, it's probably best I put you in touch with one of the regulation, who look at it really deeply. I mean, look, it's very difficult for me to speak on a kind of general basis about regulation, because in most countries the capabilities of the regulator vary quite a lot. And so I think the first thing we'd look at is, so what can a regulator actually do? You know what I mean? What action can they take? How long would it take for a regulatory action if it's something that the country or the companies disagree with? How powerful would they be in just making things happen? The regulatory regime for TV and broadcast in China is totally different to Malaysia, to a more liberal country like Singapore. In somewhere like China or Russia, when the regulator says, or the government says something must happen, there's no debate, no question, and it happens tomorrow. When Ofcom says something to the broadcasters in the UK, everyone's like, wow, matter, we're not going to do anything, and they argue for a few months and then nothing happens. So it's so I think we'd look pretty closely at how effectively a regulator can translate its policy into reality. I mean, I think the most effective regulation in a very, very general basis, and this is not just for media and entertainment, but in general, is a consensual relationship between the regulator and the companies or entities it's trying to regulate. And so I think it's very much it's a political and it's a human problem. So I think hopefully the regulator will be able to establish some kind of thought leadership over these critical issues, and would then be able to establish a consensus amongst the companies that it needed to convince, and then you have a chance of collective action. But this is what broadcasters struggle with, because they spend their entire lives competing against each other. So it's culturally very difficult for them to do anything together, frankly.
Should the regulator protect broadcasters?
Another interesting philosophical question. I think, look, in the current environment, so look, broadcasters, so speaking about the UK market or the European market, the role of a public service broadcaster has been, deeply ingrained in the sort of national, political, cultural fabric of the countries. They have a very important role to play, particularly in news broadcast, of course. But also, public service broadcasters will also make shows or make content which doesn't necessarily make money. It's not commercially viable, but there are very important social or cultural reasons to make those shows. So if a regulator is going to protect broadcasters, then I think there has to be a clear and cohesive vision between the government and the regulator about, so what do we actually want the broadcasters to do? What role do we want them to play in national life? And I think once you have that vision, then you know how much money to throw at the problem. But it's not going to be free. But look, I think if we imagine what the landscape would look like with either much less broadcasters or zero broadcasters, I don't think that would be a step forward. I think a plurality of media voices and ways to communicate with the audience tends to be beneficial, and then you'll get the competitive effects of hopefully making everyone better.
First, is it embedded in our national policy objectives in terms of cultural representation?
Right. Yeah. Malaysia is a culturally, ethnically diverse country. I think having a shared voice in the form of newspapers, media, or broadcast is very, very important. I think Singapore is relatively similar as well, with very diverse.
One last question.
Yeah.
In terms of looking at other regulators as benchmarks, do you see examples where they are regulating or obtaining licensing revenue from the OTTs, and how they?
I think Thailand is thinking about something along these. They're thinking about it. I think because I think it's NBTC, something like that in Thailand. I think because there are many license fees for TV channels, and I think they're looking at the growth of OTT. They don't have similar arrangements or anywhere near a similar level of control. So I think that they're considering it. But then there would almost certainly have to be some kind of legislative backing, because especially if you want to charge, especially if you want to license foreign companies, essentially.
Maybe it's more indirect. For example, for us, we're thinking about taxing the digital economy.
Right.
Maybe that's how we get to them, I'm not sure.
Possibly. Quite possibly. I think in that model, you want to be taxing the companies, not the audiences. essentially take it out of that part of the value chain. It's certainly, look, I mean, if we think about the digital platform's impact on, say, newspapers in general and digital journalism, you know, there is an argument that that they should be made to subsidise, you know, some of the huge competitive impacts that they've had on, you know, newspapers trying to distribute their content online and earn online advertising.
Sorry about that. Sorry to cut you short.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be so late for my next meeting, but you guys ask good questions.
But we can take a consolidated questions if you're planning. Then I will coordinate with the team. Then we can answer.
Yeah, send me an email.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. You've been very patient.